The war had turned the air of London into something heavy and strange, a kind of thick grey weight that pressed on the chest and whispered through every broken window. In the early months of 1943, when the city still shook from the distant growl of Luftwaffe bombers, beneath the noise and the fear, there existed a silence deeper than the underground tunnels, buried inside a laboratory that officially did not exist. Dr. Edmund Caro was not a soldier. He did not wear medals or salute flags. He wore a lab coat that had been washed so often the fabric had thinned at the elbows, and he carried a calmness that made the younger assistants uneasy. He walked through the corridors of Section 9, the code name given to an abandoned postal facility deep beneath Chancery Lane, where the Ministry of Defense had placed a small group of physicists, chemists, and engineers under his direction. Their orders were simple on paper but impossible in reality, to find something that could end the war before it ended them. Every door they passed through required 3 keys, 2 signatures, and 1 soldier with a blank expression. The walls were wet with condensation, and the sound of dripping pipes was constant, rhythmic, like a second clock keeping time for secrets no one above ground could know. Caro assistant, a young woman named Eliza Trent, followed closely behind him that morning. Her notebook was already half filled with data from the last experiment, but her eyes were restless. She was quick with numbers, quicker with questions, and though she had joined the project as a mathematician, she often seemed to understand the moral tension of their work more than any of them. "Sir," she said softly, her voice echoing against the stone walls, "the calculations from yesterday don't make sense." The readings from the second chamber spiked again. "If we continue to amplify the core reaction, it could." "Could what, Miss Trent?" Caro interrupted, his tone steady but not cold. He didn't look at her, just kept walking, his hands behind his back. "Could destroy us. That's the idea, isn't it? To destroy before we are destroyed." She didn't answer. The hum of generators filled the pause. The laboratory itself looked nothing like the image of science one might imagine, no shining glassware or organized shelves, only steel tables, thick cables, and machines built from desperation and borrowed time. The centerpiece of the room was a sphere of dull metal, no larger than a football, suspended within a network of copper coils and mirrored panels. It emitted a faint, unnatural hum that seemed to vibrate in the bones rather than the ears. Around it stood 3 other men, Professor Alden, a chemist who had once lectured at Oxford before the Blitz took his family, Captain Rook, the military liaison whose uniform never quite fit the gloom of the place, and a thin engineer named Harris, who had built the containment field by combining spare parts from a crashed German bomber. When Caro entered, they turned as if something invisible had just shifted in the air. "It's ready," Alden said quietly. "We reached stable containment overnight. The readings are unlike anything we've ever seen. Pure energy, sir. No decay. No loss." Caro nodded, stepping closer to the device. "And you're sure it's stable?" "As stable as something not meant to exist can be," Alden muttered. The hum grew louder when Caro approached, like it recognized him. He reached out a gloved hand, stopping just short of touching the surface. The faint warmth radiating from the metal felt alive. "This," he said, almost to himself, "is not a bomb. It's a thought. A single equation made real." Captain Rook frowned. "The brass won't care what you call it, Doctor. They want something that kills faster than the Germans can blink. You think they'll hesitate to use it?" Caro turned, his gray eyes tired but sharp. "That's why we haven't told them what it really does." Eliza's head snapped up. "Sir, what it really does?" Caro looked at her and then at the others. "You've all seen the readings. The energy amplification, the resonance. But what you haven't seen, what none of us fully understand, is that this reaction doesn't release energy like fire or radiation. It bends it. Compresses it. If we could control that curve, theoretically, we could fold the energy of space itself." Alden shook his head. "You're talking nonsense, Edmund. Space isn't fabric we can just fold. It is, Caro said simply. Einstein thought so. But what if we could fold not just light, but time along with it? The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down. Even the machine seemed to quiet itself, waiting. Eliza finally spoke. You think this device can affect time? I don't think, Caro replied, I know it can. The anomaly detected last week, the brief disappearance of the metal rod from Chamber B, wasn't destruction. It was displacement. Captain Rook's jaw tightened. You're telling me you made something vanish and appear again 5 seconds later, and you call that displacement? Caro looked at him. Would you rather call it the beginning of the end? A sudden flicker of light filled the room. The hum grew sharper, vibrating the instruments. Eliza's notebook trembled in her hands. Power surge. Harris shouted, running to the control panel. It's drawing energy from the backup lines. Caro didn't move. He just stared at the glowing sphere, his mind racing faster than his fear. Don't shut it off, he said. Alden turned on him, horrified. Are you mad? It could collapse the entire field. Exactly, Caro whispered. Let's see what it wants. The air rippled. For a moment, the walls seemed to bend inward, like the world itself was inhaling. The sound became deafening, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Everything froze. The hum vanished. The light steadied. Harris exhaled shakily. Containment stable. No breaches. But Eliza pointed at the sphere, her face pale. Sir, look. Inside the mirrored surface, faintly visible, was the outline of something that hadn't been there before. A shadow of a man, or perhaps a memory of one, standing motionless within the reflection. Caro stepped closer, heart pounding. The figure was wearing a uniform, but not British. God help us, Alden whispered. That's a German insignia. Caro's voice was low, unsteady. No. Look closer. The reflection shifted slightly as though the man within had moved. His face became clearer. It was Caro himself. Eliza dropped her notebook. The hum began again. The figure in the reflection didn't move at first, only stood there, watching them through the mirrored surface of the sphere, his features faint but unmistakable. It was Dr. Edmund Caro, the same gray eyes, the same creases at the corners of his mouth, but his face looked older, thinner, as if years had passed on one side of the glass while only moments had moved on the other. Eliza stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. Sir, that's you. Caro didn't speak. He felt the air thicken, each breath slower than the last, as though time itself were hesitating. The others moved with a kind of stunned caution, like sleepwalkers afraid to wake. The reflection blinked, a small, sharp motion that broke the silence. Then the hum shifted pitch again. The lights flickered, the metal floor beneath their feet trembled, and the mirrored surface began to ripple as if it were water disturbed by wind. Caro raised his hand, but before he could speak, a sound like 1,000 whispers filled the room, fragments of words, bits of voices, echoing through layers of static and distance. London, no survivors, time breach. It wasn't supposed to happen. Stop them before. Then silence. The sphere dimmed, returning to its dull, quiet glow. The reflection was gone. Alden ran a hand through his thinning hair. This is no longer physics, Edmund. This is sorcery. Caro turned to him, voice calm but trembling beneath. Physics and sorcery are the same thing until someone writes the equation to explain it. Captain Rook's patience cracked. Enough riddles, Doctor. What did we just see? Caro walked to the control desk and stared at the monitors still flickering with scattered data. Not a reflection. A resonance. I believe we saw ourselves, our future selves, through a distortion in time. The experiment may have folded a fragment of space back on itself. It's possible. Possible what? Eliza asked, her voice soft, almost pleading. Possible that time, as we know it, is no longer moving in one direction here. The air in the lab seemed colder then, though no one moved to adjust the heaters. Eliza's fingers trembled as she wrote the readings into her notebook, though the numbers made no sense, voltages rising where there should be none, atomic decay reversing for a split second before resuming its natural state. Outside the sealed doors of Section 9, the city above carried on its wounded rhythm, sirens, engines, hurried feet, but down here, deep beneath the surface, something unnatural had taken root. Hours passed before anyone spoke again. The hum of the sphere became part of the air, an invisible pulse like a second heartbeat in the room. Eliza was the first to break the silence. Sir, if what we saw was a future version of you, doesn't that mean whatever this machine does, it's already happened? Caro looked up slowly. Perhaps. Or perhaps it means time is folding over itself, showing us fragments of paths we haven't yet walked. Alden scoffed. You sound like a prophet. I sound like a man terrified of what he's made, Caro said, and for the first time, he smiled without meaning to. That night, while the others rested in the narrow bunks of the underground quarters, Eliza stayed awake at her desk. The noise of the machines was a lullaby of danger, steady and strange. She reviewed the data, each line of numbers repeating an impossible pattern, energy spikes that mirrored themselves perfectly across time intervals. At 2:37 a.m., she heard something, faint footsteps outside the lab door. Sir, she called, thinking perhaps it was Caro. No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then, from beyond the heavy metal door, she heard a voice, a man's voice, low and distant. Eliza, don't let them open it. She froze, blood draining from her face. It was Caro's voice. But Caro was asleep in the next room. She ran to the sleeping quarters, heart pounding. He was there, lying on the cot, half awake, blinking at her sudden intrusion. Miss Trent, what on earth? You said something, she blurted, breathless. Outside the lab door. You said not to open it. Caro sat up, confusion deepening into alarm. I didn't leave my bed. The hum rose again in the background. They both turned toward the lab, where the faint light from the sphere was now leaking through the narrow window slit above the door, pulsing, rhythmic, like it was breathing. Caro stood and grabbed his coat. Stay here, he ordered. She shook her head. Not a chance. When they entered the lab, the air was electric, tingling on their skin. The sphere had changed, its mirrored surface now darker, filled with a shifting fog that seemed to swirl with faint outlines of movement. Caro approached slowly, every nerve in his body warning him to stop. He ignored it. As he came closer, shapes began to form inside the fog, buildings, smoke, flashes of light. A skyline. He recognized it instantly. London. But not as it was now. It was burning, broken, a wasteland of ash and ruin. And above the wreckage, the sky itself seemed torn, ripped open in a circular rift of light. Eliza covered her mouth. Oh my God! A voice came from the sphere again, clearer this time, though twisted by static. Caro, you have to destroy it. The weapon doesn't end the war, it ends time. He stared into the swirling light, his heart hammering. Who are you? The voice answered, faint but unmistakable. You already know. The image flickered violently. The sphere began to pulse faster, the hum growing deeper until the walls shook. Instruments fell from tables, glass shattered, and a blinding flash filled the room. Then, darkness. When Caro opened his eyes, everything was silent. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal. The others, Alden, Harris, Rook, rushed into the room moments later, faces pale, shouting questions. The sphere was gone. Where it had floated, there was now only a circular scorch mark on the floor, faintly glowing. Caro and Eliza stood motionless, unable to speak. The data screens all displayed the same message, one that none of them had programmed. Temporal breach stabilized. Awaiting synchronization. Alden stared at the words, horrified. What does that mean? Caro barely whispered, it means the device isn't gone. It's somewhere else, or someone else. They worked through the night, combing through the data, trying to find a trace of what had happened. Every attempt to understand it only led to more impossibility, energy outputs that exceeded nuclear levels, radiation readings that fluctuated backward, timestamps that repeated the same minute over and over. By dawn, Rook left to report to the ministry. By afternoon, soldiers surrounded Section 9. And by nightfall, a man in a black uniform bearing no insignia arrived. He carried no papers, no introduction. Only authority that silenced the room. I am Colonel Strathmore, he said quietly. By order of His Majesty's government, all research related to Project Aeternum is now classified under maximum secrecy. You will speak of it to no one. Caro glanced at Eliza. Project Aeternum? Strathmore smiled faintly. That is what we're calling your discovery, Doctor. A weapon beyond the atomic, beyond comprehension. You've done your country proud. It's not a weapon, Caro said sharply. Strathmore's smile didn't fade. Everything is a weapon when men are dying fast enough. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. You'll continue your work. Under supervision. The Prime Minister himself will be briefed. And Doctor, whatever you saw tonight, forget it. When the door shut, the room felt colder than before. Eliza spoke first. He knows. Caro nodded slowly. Yes. And he doesn't care what it costs. She stepped closer, her eyes filled with fear and something else, resolve. Then we can't let them use it. Caro looked at the empty space where the sphere had once floated. The faint scorch still glowed, like the memory of light refusing to fade. He whispered, we may not have a choice. If it's already happened. The hum returned then, soft, low, from somewhere deep beneath the floor. Eliza looked down, horrified. Sir, it's coming back. The hum began again, slow at first, like a distant vibration felt more in the chest than in the air. The sound crawled through the floor, into the walls, up the cables that lined the laboratory ceiling. Every bulb flickered, every instrument needle twitched, as if the entire underground complex were holding its breath. Eliza was the first to move, her voice a whisper. It's not over. Caro stared at the floor, where the faint circle of scorched metal still glowed like a wound that refused to close. No, he said softly. It's just begun again. The others had left hours ago, soldiers stationed outside, orders sealed, the corridor beyond the reinforced door guarded by men who didn't know what they were guarding. But here, inside Section 9, something beyond their comprehension stirred back to life. Eliza crouched near the circle, her hand trembling as she held the radiation detector closer. Readings are rising again. Sir, it's generating power from nothing. There's no input source. Caro turned to the nearest console. The monitors flashed erratic lines of code, not numbers but something that looked like fragments of language, symbols rearranging themselves faster than any human could type. He stepped back. It's rewriting itself. The lights above dimmed until only the faint glow of the circle remained. The air shimmered, just slightly, and then a shape began to emerge from the floor, slowly, like a ghost forming from vapor. The sphere was returning, piece by piece, its mirrored surface knitting itself from threads of invisible light until it hovered again before them, perfectly intact. Eliza whispered, it found its way back. Caro's voice was barely audible. No. We found it again. Time is folding back on us. He moved toward the sphere, the hum rising with every step. His reflection appeared in the surface, clear now, his face looking pale, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. But behind his reflection, behind him, stood another figure. He turned sharply, but there was no one there. The figure remained in the reflection, though. It was him again, the same older version he'd seen before. This time, his double spoke. The voice came not through ears, but directly into his mind, a whisper beneath thought itself. Edmund. Don't let them use it. They won't stop. They'll try to weaponize time, and when they do, there will be no war left to win. Only echoes. Caro's hands shook. What are you? A hallucination? The reflection's mouth moved. A consequence. The hum turned into a roar. The sphere began to glow white-hot, and then the lab exploded with light. When Caro opened his eyes, he was no longer in the laboratory. He stood in a street, a silent, ruined street, ash drifting like snow through a sky the color of iron. The buildings were broken skeletons. Smoke curled from the blackened remains of buses, lampposts twisted like melted wax. He recognized the place instantly. London. Or what was left of it. Eliza was beside him, eyes wide, clinging to the edge of his coat. Sir, what is this? Where are we? Caro's voice trembled. I don't know. But I think we've gone too far forward. They walked slowly through the desolation. No sound but the crunch of debris beneath their feet. In the distance, the river was nothing but a streak of black sludge reflecting the burning horizon. On a collapsed wall, someone had painted words in crude letters, "We tried to stop it." Eliza read it aloud, then turned to him. What happened here? He stared at the skyline, or what was left of it, and said quietly, us. We happened. They moved through the ruins until they reached what once had been the Houses of Parliament. The clock tower lay on its side, split open, gears scattered across the ground like bones. Eliza picked up a piece of metal, still faintly warm. It's recent. Caro's mind raced. If this is the future, we might still be inside the echo. A projection from the machine. We could be seeing the result of what the weapon becomes. From behind them came a voice. You're not supposed to be here. They turned. A man in a torn uniform stepped forward, his face hidden behind a cracked gas mask. The insignia on his shoulder was British, but the colors were wrong, an emblem Caro didn't recognize. The man raised a hand. Stay back. You're infected. Infected? Eliza repeated, confused. With what? The soldier lowered his weapon slightly. Temporal sickness. No one passes through without it. You're not from this year, are you? Caro's heart froze. What year is it? The soldier hesitated. 1979. Or what's left of it? Eliza gasped. That's 36 years ahead. The soldier nodded slowly. The machine went active in 45. They called it Aeternum. Said it would end all wars. Instead it ended time. He stepped closer, his voice shaking. We don't live in days anymore. We live in loops. The same weeks replay again and again. Some remember, most don't. London burns, it rebuilds, and burns again. Forever. Caro felt his stomach twist. The machine, it survived. The soldier nodded. It became the heart of everything. No one can shut it down now. It powers the world and destroys it at the same time. Eliza's voice broke. We did this. The soldier looked at them carefully. You're not like the others. You remember before it began, don't you? Caro swallowed hard. We built it. The soldier stared in disbelief. Then maybe you can end it. Before Caro could answer, the sky cracked open. A streak of white light tore through the clouds, spiraling downward like lightning frozen in midair. The ground shook, buildings shuddered, and in the heart of the city a pillar of radiance rose, a perfect sphere of light hovering where the old laboratory once stood. The core, Caro whispered. It's still there. The soldier looked at him urgently. If you're going back, go now. The loops will reset soon. Everything will start again. If you don't reach it before then, you'll be trapped here forever. Caro nodded, grabbing Eliza's hand. Come on. They ran through the ruins toward the light, each step sending shards of glass and ash flying beneath their feet. The closer they came, the heavier the air grew, bending around them like gravity itself had warped. Time fractured around the sphere, the same street repeating itself every few yards, their own shadows flickering backward, seconds colliding with each other. Eliza stumbled, disoriented. We're running in circles. Caro pulled her forward. Then we keep running until the circle breaks. They reached the base of the sphere. It was enormous now, 20 feet across, pulsing with energy so intense it distorted the ground. Inside it, he could see flashes, moments from the past, from their lab, from the instant it was created. He saw himself speaking to Eliza, saw soldiers marching into Section 9, saw the explosion that must have fractured time itself. He turned to her. This is the breach point. If we can reach inside, maybe we can reset it. Undo the first ignition. How? She asked, tears streaking the soot on her face. He looked at her, exhausted. By giving it back what it took. A life. Before she could protest, he stepped closer to the sphere. The energy lashed out like lightning, striking his body with a blinding burst of light. He screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of the world collapsing around them. Eliza ran forward, shouting his name, reaching for him, but the light surged again, lifting him off the ground. His body began to dissolve into the glow, piece by piece, his face calm now, almost peaceful. Eliza, he said, his voice echoing both near and far, tell them to bury it. To forget it. Promise me. She shook her head, sobbing. I can't. You must. Time isn't meant to obey men. It remembers. With that, he vanished into the light. The sphere pulsed once more, brighter than the sun, and then everything went silent. When Eliza opened her eyes, she was lying on the cold laboratory floor. The hum was gone. The air was still. She sat up slowly. The walls were intact. The machines were humming quietly, as if nothing had ever happened. Alden was at his desk, Harris sorting instruments, Captain Rook writing reports. They all looked the same. She stood, disoriented. Where's Dr. Caro? Alden glanced at her, confused. Who? Her heart froze. Dr. Edmund Caro. Our lead scientist. Rook frowned. Miss Trent, you're the project lead. There's never been anyone named Caro here. She backed away, her hands shaking. No, that's not possible. She turned toward the containment platform. The sphere was gone. In its place was a small box, sealed, unmarked, humming faintly. A single piece of paper lay beside it. Her name was written on it, in Caro handwriting. She unfolded it, eyes blurring. Eliza, if you're reading this, it means time reset. They won't remember me, and maybe that's for the best. The machine is silent now, but it dreams. You must never let them wake it again. Burn everything. Start over. The world deserves a future that isn't repeating itself. E. Her tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink. She folded it back carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. When she looked at the box again, she felt that faint, familiar hum vibrating through the air, the sound of something alive, waiting. Outside, the faint echo of sirens drifted through the tunnels, and for a moment, she thought she heard his voice again, quiet, somewhere beyond time itself. Eliza, remember what we broke. She walked toward the console and pressed the emergency purge sequence. The warning lights flared red, the engines roared to life, and a deep rumble shook the lab. She whispered, "Goodbye, sir." The explosion was silent, a flash of white swallowing everything. When the soldiers arrived hours later, they found nothing but rubble where Section 9 had been. The ministry declared it an accident, another casualty of wartime secrecy. The files were buried, the records sealed. No one ever spoke of Project Aeternum again. But in the years that followed, strange anomalies began to appear, pockets of air where clocks ticked backward, fragments of voices whispering from empty rooms, and for a few fleeting seconds on cold winter nights, Londoners swore they could hear a faint hum beneath the streets. And somewhere, deep beneath the city that refused to stop remembering, something waited patiently in the dark, silent, dreaming, until the next equation was written.